In this topic, we're going to look at selection and evolution, variation. So it's a nice short topic. By the end of this chapter, you should be able to answer the questions, what are the different types of variation? And what are the different causes of variation? So let's start off with what are the different types of variation. Now, every one of the billions of organisms on planet Earth is unique. Even monozygotic twins, although genetically identical, vary as a result of their different environmental experiences. So you've got two types of variation: discontinuous variation and continuous variation. Let's start off with discontinuous variation. Did you know that there are people who can roll their tongues and people who cannot roll their tongues? So this is an example of discontinuous variation. The variation in the characteristics is due to one or very few genes or alleles. Environmental factors have little influence on discontinuous variation. Can you think of another example? Yes, blood groups is another example. So this is the kind of graph that you'd get, where there are a few distinct categories. Discontinuous variation can be represented either on bar charts or pie graphs. So points to remember about discontinuous variation are: it's found in characteristics that are controlled by one or very few genes with only a few alleles. They are not modified by the environment. And there are only a few discrete categories. Right, moving on to continuous variation. Now, some characteristics of organisms grade into one another, and they form a continuum known as continuous variation. So in humans, two examples are height and mass. Can you think of any other examples? Skin color, and in plants, leaf width. So variation within these characteristics is due to many genes and may be affected by the environment. For example, individuals may be genetically predetermined to be the same height, but there are variations due to environmental factors such as diet. So if you take a large sample and plot the graph, for example, the height of individuals, you should get a bell-shaped curve. This is known as a frequency distribution curve. So on the left, you've got the frequency, and at the bottom, you've got the characteristic, for example, height. So points to remember about continuous variation are that it's found in characteristics that are controlled by many genes, may be affected by the environment, and they show a normal distribution range. Let's have a look at the different causes of variation. You've got genetic and environmental. Starting off with genetic variation, this is the result of the genotype of each individual. In other words, the genes they possess and the forms of allele of each gene that are present. This genetic makeup varies from generation to generation as a result of mutations, crossing over, independent assortment of homologous chromosomes, random mating between individuals within a species, and random fusion of gametes at fertilization. So what I want you to do is copy down these points because we're going to expand on them in a moment. Okay, starting off with mutations. This is the change in the quantity or sequence of bases in DNA. So you've got two basic forms: a gene, also known as a point mutation, and a chromosome mutation. Now, whilst mutations in the body, the somatic cells, are not passed on to the next generation, those in the reproductive tissues may be inherited. Crossing over and the consequent formation of recombinants during prophase 1 of meiosis leads to equivalent sections of chromatids being exchanged, and therefore separates linked genes that would otherwise be inherited together. Independent assortment of homologous chromosomes. This occurs at metaphase 1 of meiosis and results in the daughter cells receiving a mixture of chromosomes, kind of like in the same way a card player receives a random combination of cards when a hand is dealt. And then random mating between individuals within a species. So which pair of organisms of a species that mate, and hence which two genotypes combine, is largely a matter of chance, although most humans do choose their partner. And then random fusion of gametes at fertilization. So when mating takes place, which gametes fuse with which at fertilization is random. And then you've got environmental variation. So environmental influences affect the way a genotype is expressed and result in different phenotypes. The changes are not inherited or cannot be inherited, and examples include climatic factors such as temperature, rainfall and sunlight, nutrients or diet, and pH. For example, sunlight may affect the leaf width, the nutrients or diet may affect height, here's an example of rickets. What is the cause? A genetic variation or environmental variation? This is environmental variation because the condition is due to a lack of vitamin D. Okay, in summary, what are the different types of variation that we've discussed? We looked at discontinuous and continuous variation. So remember that discontinuous variation is when the variation in the characteristics is due to one or very few genes or alleles. And continuous variation is when it's due to many genes and may be affected by the environment. And then what are the different causes of variation? You've got genetic and environmental. So genetic variation includes mutations, crossing over, independent assortment of homologous chromosomes, random mating between individuals within a species, and random fusion of gametes at fertilization. And then environmental factors include climatic, pH, and nutrients or diet. And that concludes our lesson. The end.